looking at everything the competitor's doing. You can really like crawl and scrape and look at everything a competitor's doing and really see how your positioning compares and like where you're weak relative to them in just a few minutes. That's like a fairly basic use case and like very easy to do. You don't hear that as commonly referenced. Yeah, just that like honest critique and assessment of like how you're positioned at any given time, and just you gotta like really steer it away from like blazing you and telling you like you're the best, you're great. Like, hey, be harsh on us.
Hello and welcome back to Best Story Wins. I'm your host Josh, and today our guest is my co-founder Jason. Jay, thanks for joining us today.
Good to see you, Josh.
Yeah, man. So the whole point of this conversation is to do a bit of a deep dive on not just the theory behind how to use AI in workflows for developing great brand content, but how are we actually using it in practice? When you go on LinkedIn, it seems like everyone's got a hot take. Sometimes it's informed by actual experience, and sometimes it's informed by what people see other people writing. And sometimes it's hard to kind of sift through it all to understand how people are actually using these AI tools to actually do creative work. And so, as someone who I know tinkers on this type of work and is on the front lines with our team, figuring out how to scale up creative and create efficiencies, I'm excited to dig in on these topics with you.
Yeah, same here.
Cool, man. So you've been pushing us forward in terms of developing what you call a brand operating system. Can you walk us through, first of all, what that is and what you mean by that, but then also how you identified the need for this thing that's ultimately focused on brand governance versus just content creation?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I think most people, who are heavy users of, chat, whether that's Chat GPT or Claude Code, or sorry, Claude Chat, have probably like accidentally or maybe by prompting have noticed it's, increasingly giving you visual artifacts, whether it's like an HTML page or a diagram or whatever. And it's like, wow, cool. And the first thing people usually say is like, oh, how can I make this look like my brand? And that was kind of a light bulb moment for me when I started seeing us using those more internally, and um, just thinking about the pain points too of you have an idea and you want to test collateral and you need to like write content and find somebody who's available to design it. It's harder to get those things out in the market and test and get feedback. I think it's nice if you can just generate it and have it and trust that it's on brand. But more than likely, certain I can only speak for myself really, but if I go to make something myself, it's not going to look like our brand. I'm going to need a designer personally. But it's nice to have some things where I can have confidence, like, oh, this is actually following our brand system, which is like beautiful and thoughtfully compiled, um, and this is like kind of an age-old challenge I think we've tried to solve in various ways as a company, and seen our clients try to solve, which is like you create a really cool brand system, including like guidelines for data visualization and iconography and illustration, all of this, but like not everyone on the team can really make use of that. You get, you can set up templates and those are useful, but they kind of degrade over time too. So I started thinking just about like, as we talked about creating better brand systems and content systems for our clients, it really led me down a path of like, what actually are we talking about? And how do we make that system better than, when your team is too busy and doesn't have, time or people to do something, like call us. That's not like a system for them. It's a solution that benefits, us obviously, and them. But how do we actually like create something that helps solve the problem, and as I started looking at that, I realized it was kind of boring to me at first, because I was like doing a lot of the deep research on our market pain points and so forth. And I was like, it just kept bubbling up as like AI governance, AI governance, AI. And I was like, I don't want that. I don't really want to solve that. I don't even know how to solve that. Um, but then I like just started exploring it more, and I thought like, wow, this is cool. There's a way to um, actually do this in an interesting way. And the simplest version of that I see is like that's actually kind of weirdly technically challenging is just that first step of like, how do you actually get the brand to be applied to these little artifacts that you're making in chat? You can certainly do everything in, the AI coding environments like Claude Code, Cursor, where you have like ready access to like a GitHub repository of all the brand assets. But it's actually quite hard in chat and in so let alone doing it manually. So I thought I just really set out as like, how do I get not just the visual identity but the verbal identity? How do we get the whole messaging system and the visual identity compiled so that when we are doing increasingly like code generated or chat generated assets, the brand is just available as a source of truth to anyone on the team to guide that creation.
Hmm. Yeah, that's cool. So I think when most people talk about or think about AI for the use of content production, we think about it in terms of like speeding things up and just kind of, being able to do things really, really fast, right? It sounds like you're more interested in not just happens like in the creation itself, but after what happens once the content's created. What do you think the problem is that you're solving here with that in mind? Is it that AI governance piece that you talked about?
It's funny, right? Because I think for years, our team included, it's been articulated as a scale problem, right? Like everyone wants to scale, and I think the problem has shifted a little bit, and I mean, you could argue that it's still like, how do we scale with quality, which is what it always has been. But it's also become so easy to, if you just look at generative content, it is quite easy to actually scale in volume, and to create a bunch of stuff. But, and, you have everyone, encouraged or forced or whatever you want to call it to become key opinion leaders or thought leaders, and everyone just trying to like generate stuff. And then if they're like, oh, I want a visual in here, and they just slap some generic mid-journey image in there, like maybe the cost of that is low or the damage of that is low, but like it is generally, if that person's a technically like an ambassador for your brand, um, you're that approach to like creating both what's being written and any visuals that are in that content are like certainly creating some brand drift, or they're not creating a sense of like any kind of coherent brand story, which is, as we know, important for like AEO. And it's also, increasingly the stuff that makes someone go like, hey, that doesn't look like our brand. Or, if you have a demand gen team who can't, you know, I think about this scenario a lot that we've heard from clients where, the demand gen team is asking for new campaign assets, but the brand design team is like sales kickoff that week and they're slammed and they can't get new ads. And then what does that brand design team or the demand gen team do in that situation? They're going to do their best to create with what they have, maybe an old template, or maybe they do have some tools, but then that gets pushed right to social, paid social, and the CEO sees it and they're like, who are they going to talk to first? They're going to talk to the brand design team, and it is a poor reflection on them. it's like a real scenario, we hear about. And so that like doesn't have to be that way, with the current state of tooling. It's just like that demand gen team needs a source of truth on the brand, and not just templates that they go in and edit manually themselves, but like something that really compiles right. And that a lot of the like governance tools that are out there, I feel like are, you can run the image checker, or like it'll flag problems with the thing, but then if you have to go back and manually edit that or something, then like it's not a great workflow, right? And also, who's running their image they created through some governance checker platform, it's like, I think it's got to happen at the moment of creation, and not just like automated brand police making sure they don't do something stupid. But it's like everyone wants to do a good job, right? Like everyone wants to create something that actually looks good and feels on brand. They're not trying to like do something that makes the brand look stupid. But so it's more like kind of an enablement thing, right? Like how do you, so back to your question, like how do you scale on brand quality content? It's like equipping people with the right source of truth on the brand that is also like, when it shifts, which it always does, messaging changes, uh, visual new things are added to the visual identity. That's like surfaced really well in places that they can use it. And I think that's led me to this idea of like, it's got to be portable, right? It's not like, how do you get one tool to rule them all? But like the landscape's changing so fast that like the best tool for the job today might be surpassed next week. And you don't want to be like locked in and all in on that platform. You need to be able to like pull your brand source of truth into some other tool and have it be like machine readable, so that you're able to like take advantage of that latest and greatest like generative tool, but still have it like read your brand and access your brand assets. So that's been really on my mind. Like just, it's like this equipping and enabling thing. Like if you think of like governance at the moment of creation, it's more about this like equipping and enabling than like policing people.
Based on your experience and what you've seen us be able to do with these tools, I get the impression that there's probably some best practices or kind of common wisdom in terms of like what to use for what. But what are you seeing right now in terms of like some underrated opportunities to leverage AI for content creation?
There's like degrees of sophistication with this stuff, but I think there's some basics that are still pretty underutilized. And one is just on the like kind of brand, I guess, like diagnostic level, like just auditing your brand and really like looking at everything the competitors doing. Get You can really like crawl and scrape and look at everything a competitor's doing and really see how your positioning compares and like where you're weak relative to them in just a few minutes. And I think it's uh that's like a fairly basic use case and like very easy to do, but I don't think it's like you don't hear that like as commonly referenced. But I think that like, yeah, just that like honest critique and assessment of like how you're positioned, at any given time, and just like really like, and not asking it to, you gotta like really steer it away from like, glazing you and telling you like you're the best, you're great. It's like, hey, be harsh on us, like where are we, you know just like everyone else, and where are we, um there's a dime a dozen for this, and like where's their open space, that that no one's really looking. I think that's a use case that I think just is very simple that is a bit underutilized, you know.
Okay, so shifting gears here to talk about the actual tools and systems. So I'm curious to hear you share a little bit about what your actual stack of tools looks like that you use day to day. And can you unpack for us a little bit about what of these tools you've built, which of these tools you've built, and then which ones are using that are more out of the box options that anybody could deploy like today?
Most things I'm working on right now, I'm thinking about like I want other people to be able to use the same environment, or like if I figure something out, I either want somebody on our team or a client or general public to be able to make use of it. So I've steered clear a bit of like anything super proprietary in terms of like this is where this separate tool is. I don't think there's a need to like replicate the well built things that exist, you know. So generally though, right now I really like, I think there's like a formula that, or like mental model that I really like, which is just having like, where's the knowledge base and where are the rules and where are the like assets I want to reference, you know, and workflows. So I really like thinking about this brand system approach that is like kind of obsessive on right now. Uh, Really like storing in Notion some deeper workflows for like market intelligence, feeding in like signals to update like the messaging, like verbal identity architecture. So that's kind of like push research in there. Notion has a cool, you know, agent that you can configure. So I gave it like a research workflow where it's, you know, filtering. Then I like the kind of human readable databases there in Notion. So you can go see, you know, a little bit more readily if you're less technical. Just like, okay, here's all the market insights and so forth for all these things I want to track stored in Notion, and then sifting it through to like get like your stronger signals or more interesting proof points, or maybe even something that's flagged for like, hey, you should update your messaging or you should update your story because here's what's happening in your market that you can address. That's like the Notion piece for me right now. um I'm not a designer, but I've increasingly been using Figma, you know, primarily for like getting the visual tokens for encoding the like visual part of the identity. But generally just living in Claude Code and, you know, either pulling from Figma or writing back to Figma from there, you know, pulling from and writing back to Notion from there. So just, I think really there's pretty much nothing that you ever need to access that you can't get to from Claude Code. So I just sit in there, and there's something I want to store and be able to retrieve in chat for some other contexts, I'll, you know, push it to Notion. Um, but really like those, I feel like with those three, you can do pretty much everything, you know. And sometimes I think about it like, if I didn't need the like human readable part, or for like, you know, other people to be able to like access like a lot of the stuff that I'm doing in Notion technically could live in, you know, a code base somewhere or something, but I just like it. I like Notion. It's a fun place to kind of think of as your, I think they've always been thought of a bit as like a second brain. And they're doing a lot of really cool things, I think, to be like they're not just like slapping AI onto, you know, an existing tool. They've made some really cool steps there, and to make like their MCP connection and their AI agents like actually useful for what you're doing in Notion. So those are my big three.
People talk about brand governance a ton. It's definitely sort of a companion topic to a lot of discussions around AI. You've discussed this idea think on LinkedIn and elsewhere that brand governance really shouldn't require new software procurement, which I think can be seen by a lot of people as a fairly contrarian take, especially with a lot of folks launching new AI tools for the purpose of brand governance, right? Like they're kind of posed or framed as, solving that problem, or that's their value proposition. Why do you believe what you believe there about there not being a need for more software?
Yeah, it's not to be like anti-software or to say I think I'm generally a bit more anti-walled garden, like I don't like when you have to use that one, everything has to be in that one place and it's tough to get it out of there. And I think not all, but a lot of like kind of like the dam type solutions, like it's more of like a storage of locked and approved assets, that doesn't always help, say a salesperson who wants to edit a one sheet, like some really basic stuff that people need done, and like I've always thought about the like salesperson on a JetBlue flight editing a PowerPoint, like these are the things where like, in like majorly valuable contexts, people are like, because the like locked in system that has like all the approved brand assets, like doesn't often have like the right editability of those things for people like that salesperson on a plane. They go to like the PowerPoint, you know, copy of a copy, and so like when I think about the, and like, are they running that through some brand governance software before their meeting in the morning? Like, no, they're just going to show up at their like, you know, major enterprise pitch with like something they maybe kind of Frankenstein together. And that's why I think like the solution to that kind of scenario is not like sign up for another tool and then try to get all your stuff in there. Like part of the reason there's so much brand drift is because like things are created, like there's like one system that maybe has everything, but you can't really edit in that tool. I mean, Figma's probably the closest thing to an exception on that, where like you really can have like a pretty full brand system, and do almost everything in there, and if your whole team knows how to use Figma really well, you're probably dialed, if you have a really good brand template system. But like people are also just going to use generative tools to write, to increasingly, design things too. And I don't think the solution for that use case, which is where a lot of the brand governance challenge lies, is like people are just going to use those tools and they're going to send stuff that they generate from those tools to, customers or clients, um, I think like the solution to that isn't like a different tool that like allows you to chat inside of it or whatever. I think it's making it very clear and easy to those people, like use all the tools when you're using them. If you want to stay on brand, which you probably do, use this doc because it has everything in it that machine needs to read and know the truth of our brand, like how to get the logo in there, how to it which is like a surprisingly weird challenge. Try it, just try it in Claude chat, like getting your logo to actually be applied to the thing. You've got to really like actually encode it right, in different visual tools, maybe they can read a hex code or approximate a font. But like if you actually give it like a properly encoded, set of rules, like most of them will actually follow it really well. You just have to like, it's got to be like machine readable. And I think that the fact that can live for the most part in a single document that's like just encoded properly is like, I don't think that needs to be like, what's the word I'm looking? I don't think that needs to be. It just needs to be like kind of universally understood, and like I think someone saying like I don't think it needs to be solved, I guess, with like an expensive software solution. I think it just needs to be like, I think it needs to be solved by like properly distributing that source of truth encoded brand system to everyone on your team and having a good mechanism for making sure that that's updated for them as they use any one of, 200 generative tools out, that they're using across your organization.
We work with a lot of head of creative ops, head of brand ops, head of content ops. Obviously, it's kind of a different role depending on the company and how they decide to title their teams. But say one of these folks came to us and said, I have budget for one AI investment this quarter that will help me with my content creation mandate. What would you tell them to spend it on?
Like document the narrative architecture and like the application rules for that in a format that, AI systems can read. You got to go beyond, I think even like the brand voice doc and the different like content structure docs, the different ways people have, I guess, tried to solve, generative AI writing, um, those workflows or things certainly help level up beyond, the generic AI output if you're like write an article on this topic, but um, even, Claude skills and the like can go a long way. But like, I think that if it's like a head of content ops who certainly would be aware of the nuance of, this audience or this segment for this product at this stage of the journey, like this is what we need to say and emphasize. Um, so having like just building that the like think of it as like the kind of routing system, right? So if you have here's the perspective, here's our like sub narratives and personas and all our journey stages and like all these different dimensions and factors of like each piece of content, like how do you actually route that information properly so that like the right proof points are surfaced in the article for that persona at that journey stage, right? So I think like that system is really the architecture of it's pretty simple. I mean, you have to. I have it in Notion. I use it in Notion, for a for a client. That's where I probably store that just because it's where I already have it. Once you have that in place, it becomes really easy to like, you know, put that through, to represent your messaging system and your content strategy, but without it having to be like referenced in a doc that's like sitting in a virtual file cabinet. You know, I don't know that anyone has like their 50-page content strategy committed to memory. And even if they do, it's probably shifted and changed a little bit. So it's like, I guess not just documenting that narrative architecture and like content strategy and routing rules, but like making sure you're doing it in a way that it's kind of living and breathing and you can update it as the world changes, your market changes.
How do you think AI has changed the way that B2B brands need to think about consistency, not just across the channels, but across the tools that are now generating and distributing their content?
Everyone's still trying to make sense of AEO, right? But it's a generally accepted truth that one key ingredient of that is consistency, right? So if you believe that that's important, and it sure seems to be, right? If people are using chat more than search to find your company or to not find your company, then like brand drift is actually a pretty costly problem. If you have everyone out there trying to, again, like build the personal brand on behalf of your corporate brand and they're running wild, your brand's drifting. It's probably not actually helping your AEO presence because your company is being described, in exponentially different ways. And so, you know, there was a stat that kind of blew my mind that was like, I think it was 74% of enterprises had deployed like agentic AI into the company. People just going, use AI, but just without any governance or real like infrastructure, like how it's used. Um, so yeah, I think it's like not just like a creative problem to solve, like, but it's actually like an infrastructure problem. And so I think like back to the question of like how's it changed the way B2B brands need to think about consistency. It's like if you know that consistency is important for AEO and you know that AEO is essential for like your leads and your revenue, then like we're probably like important that you also figure out, okay, how are we actually going to, again, not just enforce but enable people to consistently tell that story. And like if you think about everyone just kind of running wild with their tool of choice, do they all actually have the same setup, and the same like, hey, by the way, here's our latest approved perspective for you to reference. By the way, here's how we actually are trying to get everyone consistently describing our company so that AI knows what our company is, not like whatever you think it might be or what this person thinks it might be. Like all those different ways of articulating that are like actually like most likely causing an actual problem.
All right, getting into the kind of conversations that we have with folks, obviously AI is like top of mind for everybody. And I would imagine, I'm not on every call that you're on with prospects, but I'm on some. I imagine a lot of the calls or the questions being asked, rather, there's probably a lot of through lines, right? People are probably asking the same things. They probably are getting a lot of their intel from thought leadership content on LinkedIn and so on and so forth. But some of the questions that you wish people were asking you, or what is a question that they should be asking but almost never do?
Yeah, this one's kind of surprising, and this doesn't apply to everyone, but I think just the basic question of like, how is my brand showing up? Like when AI, answers or like recommends a solution in our category. And there's definitely, I mean, I think everyone at this point is paying some amount of attention to that, but I think it's also like, when you think about like, just take like your typical AEO audit that you look at, it's like, it reminds me a little bit of like long tail search, and like the things that actually like the ways people find you. Like it's not like people are asking the same exact question, and so it's a little bit trickier to actually get like that full picture of like where you stand and what questions are really like driving the value and which ones to prioritize, right? And I think like back to your question, like of like what are they asking but almost never do. I think it is that question though of like, because I don't think people always know, and I don't think, maybe it's like I don't know if it's an embarrassing question to ask or if it's like maybe feeling like it's solved by someone else on the team, but just that the question and like the definitive answer, like I feel like rarely come up of like, we know this is how we're showing up when AI recommends us to like in our category. And we know that we are not showing up for it, or we know that we already are. Like I just think it's still at a maybe like this like invisible amorphous problem stage, or like it accidentally works some of the time, but I don't know. That's what's your take on that? You've been paying a lot of attention to the AEO landscape. Like do you feel like people are thinking about that question the right way?
It's an interesting one because I think that AI is like it's the topic of the day, maybe of the decade. It's definitely of the last 3 or 4 years. And it's interesting because up until last year, really, all of the discussions seemed to be around creating content. And then at some point, I think early last year, a lot of the conversation really opened up around developing workflows and processes for things like outbound. And then you started having a lot of commentary on how to create agents and do different things with OpenClaw. But I think where B2B folks are really landing the plane on what matters most for them is, while all that stuff is important and interesting and, represents opportunities for scale and efficiency, what really matters most to folks is their discoverability in the LLMs. And so I think people just want to solve that problem of AI discoverability. Like, people just want, I think, to be told, like, hey, we have a problem and or a service or a combination thereof that's going to help you figure this out. And it's going to get you back to those glory days of when your SEO was a huge driver of pipeline. And so I think folks are asking, like, how can you help me, or what can you do to help with my SEO / AI visibility? What could be an interesting reframe is, and it sounds so obvious, but like, kind of flipping the question a bit to say, like, what's getting in, how are we getting in our own way? Like, how are we getting in our own way in terms of like the AI discoverability? Like, what are the things that our team is currently doing? What are the things on our website or in our content or both that are causing this problem to be harder to solve for? Because I think that a lot of folks forget this. I do all the time, that it's easier to subtract than it is to add. And if there's things that we could do in terms of just simply repurposing content or editing existing content or cutting content that leads to that brand drift, as you've mentioned, not in the sense of like these brand assets are not consistent, but more so in terms of the story and, diminishing its potency and clarity. I think if more folks thought about that and then really worked to address the things that were counterproductive that already existed, and then work to build on a stronger foundation, I think folks would have an easier time seeing success and a lift from the various things we're trying. And this is like born out of just, thinking about our own marketing and kind of learning through experimenting and missteps that, sometimes you just get more bang for your buck by not trying to bring something new into the fold, but rather just, reworking and improving what you already have. So I don't know, that's maybe not a one-to-one for the question I asked you, but that's where my head goes with that.
Yeah.
I want to ask you about brands and how all these tools that we're all so excited to use create implications for brands. So there's a narrative in the market right now that AI is going to commoditize not only content creation, but content itself. And this obviously has an impact on brand, right? Because brand is the totality of people's touch points with your company, whether it's the people, tool, or the content you create. And content obviously plays a big role in that because in most cases, it's the first thing that people come into contact. What's your take on what's going to happen as more and more people use more and more of these tools to create more and more of this content? And how do you see this impacting brand and perception of brand and so forth?
That is the fear, right? Like anyone in creative industry agencies, whoever, it's like, okay, you can't like step into a grocery store without hearing like, all our jobs are going away, and that's it's crazy, right? Like I can't even believe the things in the last like 3 days that I've, done, or I guess just facilitated, observed, I don't know, in Claude Code of like, like, oh my God, I've never in a million years even thought about, playing a part in making something like that. And then there it is on your screen, and, uh, so like, yeah, the like commoditization of that stuff being like instant for everyone is like scary, right? Because like the assembly of those things or the production of those things like becomes so immediate, um that like it does. I mean, that's why it's commoditized, right? Or that's why that is the word we use for it, because it becomes cheaper, faster, easier to just make the thing. um but what has been really kind of blowing my mind the more I do that, and I've been doing a lot of this stuff, experimenting with things like using the column 5 brand. And man, I mean, our team has just built some of the most beautiful things, into that brand. And Kyle with I, mean, I don't know what is like 75 like logo variations, like there's a lot of cool stuff in there, and I'm like very aware that like anything I'm like generating, microsite, motion graphics, whatever, like those things are cool and interesting because of that visual identity. And like the perspective at the like nucleus of any story that's generated out of that is like, you know, interesting because, you and Ross and Asher and other people on our team spent a lot of time really thoughtfully shaping that perspective with a lot of, real life experience and input that like makes it kind of our unique flavor, and approach. And I think that's why you have people talking so much about like taste becoming, taste and attention becoming the things that are really valuable. And so I think it's like a cool thing. I'm really excited to see where this goes, where it's like, I think when we had Matt Maynard on, he was talking about this, about like, not, he doesn't think as much about differentiation. He thinks about like building a distinct brand, and I think that that human ingredient of, or like input into the machine is a absolutely essential piece of making a distinct brand. So you're, I've been really trying to remember this and be aware of this, like as I talk to people about things I'm making. It's like, for the most part, like no one really gives a shit what you just made with AI, and it could be something really, really cool. And it's like, I think it's self included. Everyone's excited to talk about what they just realized they could do with it, but almost no one really cares about like what someone else did. And, and part of that is like sometimes the thing we're excited to share, it's like, yeah, okay, cool. I know you made an HTML thing, or it output the report. Like that's what it does. Um, it's the same thing that happened with copywriting, over the last 2 years, right? It was like once the first people realized they could draft LinkedIn thought leadership with ChatGPT, you started seeing the same thing over and over again with like minor variations, but it was like the generic AI slop version of that will be like, I think writ large on, you know, apps and websites and, you know, video, motion, every media type that can be generated. If you just use the out of the box approach with none of your own unique input, words, images, whatever, it's going to look and be like everything else. So I think it's really exciting actually to think that like the like role of human creativity is like really essential at that design level and illustration level, like hand draw something, like Kyle on our team. I've been in meetings with him where he like had a concept where he's like, yeah, I couldn't really find a font for that, so I just created this hand drawn script. Or like my daughter came in and saw that and said it looked kind of like a face, so I drew a little smiley face on it. And then it's like that's making its way into a brand system. And it's like those are like kind of I think those are like the parts that become way more valuable, so that you're like not just looking like and sounding like everybody else.
A lot's been written on the topic of AI raising the floor the ceiling or both for B2B content. What's your take on that? And what do you think that means for content teams and who's going to win?
Yeah, I mean, maybe like a good analog for this is just look at like websites, right? Like, I don't know, 10 or 15 years ago, if you had a well designed, website, you're maybe like differentiated. And now, like, the templates and whatever are all pretty good. Like, I think it's probably pretty hard to make a website now that like genuinely just looks terrible, right? Like, it's possible to do it, but usually if you like see a bad website, it's just because like the company hasn't updated it in 15 years or something, right? So like the short answer to that is like I think the floor and like the ability to produce good enough is everyone can produce something that's like good enough, right? Like even the stuff that we call AI slop in copywriting is like it's all like generally like grammatically correct, right? And like it's technically good enough, but it's like um it does raise the bar, I think, on if everyone's seen that. I mean, even look at like generative video, right? It's like now we see like it being indistinguishable from reality, and hyper realistic, scenarios that like would have cost millions of dollars to produce, or even with CGI to put together, are now just like someone's doing it on their phone. It kind of numbs people out to what's actually good. It's not like I don't think there's any shelf life remaining for like it's generative and it's interesting because it's good generative AI, right? I think it's like I think what that floor being raised on like the quality, um like maybe like mechanical quality of the writing or visual content being kind of like table stakes, and it brings what's I guess assuring but also challenging is that where it's actually made it hard, what's actually harder than ever maybe is like if that mechanical quality is high and easy for everyone, how do you actually make something that anyone gives a shit about? And how do you I think that's a really important question to ask, like when putting something out is like, why would anyone care about this? Like, why? Why are we expecting them to even think this is interesting? And that I guess counter movement to like AI everything is that people are liking events now and seeing humans in person. And when you see that post on LinkedIn where like someone put a little bit of their personal life into it, they're like, oh, hey, there's a human over there. Like, that's interesting. So yeah, I think like on the B2B content front, that's where it's like, I don't know, in a sea of sameness, like what's your actual like unique thing,
What about in terms of agentic AI, which is the term on the tip of everyone's tongue? So 74% of enterprise companies have deployed this agentic AI, and it's often without governance frameworks. That's a stat that you cite when talking about brand governance often. Why does that number matter more than the adoption numbers everyone else is so excited to celebrate?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure everyone's been in some conversation, either been the person saying it or the person hearing it. Usually it's a executive mandate of like, just use AI, just use AI, just use AI, that's just a hard, you can do anything with it, right? So like we were talking about this earlier, it's okay, cool, now everyone's using it, and now you have this new problem, which is like what they're making with it. And I can put myself in, not like pointing fingers, I could put myself in this box. Like I could go, today, right? Like I could go take our SEO strategy and draft a blog post that does all the internal linking properly and follows all of our rules and whatever. But like I don't know. I'm not the person who would know, like, did that really do the right job of following, like, what we actually need that to be, you know? Um, but it's possible to build in the right framework for like governing that creation. Um, so it's like, yeah, I think trying to think of another metaphor. It's like, I don't know if like cars didn't exist, or like say like flying cars come out tomorrow and it's like there's a mandate of like everyone get off the ground and start using your flying cars, and then everyone's like, all right, we're supposed to fly in our cars, and then the flying cars start running into each other, and they're like, oh, we should probably have some like kind of general guardrails on some of this stuff, or like maybe some ways of helping people fly their cars better. It's like second step. The first one was deployed recklessly. Everyone fly in cars now. And then so the second one's like, oh, we kind of created a mess here that we got to fix.
Has building these systems and tools changed how you think about what a content agency actually is or should be in 2026 and beyond?
I mean, honestly, it's completely changed how I think about it. And I think it really ties closely to what I was saying about the distinct brand and like the human input. But I think it's like up until I think very recently, honestly, the production of, designed content or the production of things was still a technically challenging thing. I mean, you could say the same thing about code, right? Like, these things were like, and it's a hard aspect, I think, of this current moment, which is that like those were those are like highly skilled things that like for a human being to learn how to do any of those things like takes a long time, like to learn and practice and become very good at. And that like act of actually producing those things is also like something that like people enjoy. And you could say the same for writing too. And but I think like there's a shift there, and I've always thought this, like even like with the first generative visual tools, I was like, a photographer would be the best user of this, or someone with the actual illustration or design school skills like would be the best user of this generative visual tool, because they have like the brain for that, like they know the terms and all of that, right? And then like with as like generative copywriting ran amok, like I was just like, I always was like, man, an actual copywriter is like the best person to use this because they will like know whether it's good or not. I know there's like that counter of like, this sucks, it'd be easier for me to write it myself, but it's not there anymore. So I think like to answer the question directly, when I think of like a content agency, I just don't think the like production shop is like the thing that say a client would derive the most value from. I think that's really the part that's most like there's like a major existential threat, especially the more people go out of like chat environments and into code environments that also are like obviously chat enabled, where it's just like the more that people tinker with that and go like, oh my god, I just made a website in 10 minutes and it's deployed and live, like they're not going to be hiring someone else. Like when you realize you can do something yourself in 10 minutes, like what is your appetite to spend $100,000 and wait to have that manually produced, like um but I think there's still value, right? Like that taste and the like conceptual thinking, and also um that like some of the personal opinion, and also that informs how you take that generative, take the website example, like I would absolutely want to have like an art director, web designer, you know, creative copywriter involved in the briefing and the improvement and the like actual like assets that are put into that, you know. So it's like, but I think it's less about the like production and it's more about like the engineering of the system that goes into like what the types of things you're generating and also the assets themselves that are either used directly or used to train, you know, say like illustration, like what are the illustrations we're using to train a custom image generation model to like always look and feel uniquely us, you know. um so I think it's like this shift from like produce a thing one at a time to like build the system, spend more time on the conceptual things and have like better stuff that's available to the system that you're using for the actual like building. You know, it's like being more of like the architect than like the I guess like builder of the thing, you know.
Yeah, that's awesome, man. Well, Jay, thanks for being on. And for folks that want to find you online, where's the best place to do so?
I work at Column 5, so column5.com. And yeah, on LinkedIn, Jason Lankow, Lankow.
Right on. Thanks, man.
Thanks, Josh.
Yep. See you, buddy.